Hello, everyone. I am Caleb Stair, one of the hosts of F.R.E. Lunch. In between the recording and release of this episode, Hurricane Helene struck the Southeastern United States. Some of the areas mentioned in today's episode were severely impacted and are still experiencing and recovering from the storm's damages. If you or anyone you know were impacted, or if you are looking for ways to help, we will include hurricane recovery resources in this episode's description. With that said, please enjoy the rest of the episode.
Welcome to F.R.E. Lunch, the official podcast of the Food and Resource Economics Department at the University of Florida. I'm Elena Poulin, the Marketing and Communications Specialist for the department.
And I'm Caleb Stair, Assistant Instructional Professor of Food and Resource Economics and the Coordinator for Undergraduate Research in the department, meaning I get to interact regularly with the members of our F.R.E. community and see all the cool and interesting topics being explored.
That's why we made this podcast, to showcase the many ways students and faculty are using economic research to understand and address the complex issues facing agricultural and natural resource industry.
From hops to homebrew, that's right, we're tapping into the economic value of microbreweries and beer. But don't worry, our guest is just as intoxicating.
With humble beginnings as local passion projects to their explosive growth into a multi-million-dollar enterprise, microbreweries have become a cornerstone of the modern beer industry.
According to the Brewers Association, small and independent American craft brewers contribute more than $72 billion to the U.S. economy and supported nearly 460,000 jobs.
There's nothing micro about that, and it's no less true here in Florida. We have 350 breweries listed in the Florida Brewery Database. There's at least 5 here in Gainesville alone.
We are joined by Dr. Nathan Palardy. He is an assistant professor and extension economist in the Food and Resource Economics Department at the University of Florida. He specializes in economic analysis related to state and local policy and is the department's resident beer economist, in my humble opinion.
Talk about a dream job. And since Oktoberfest is right around the corner, yes, that's right, it starts in September, we figured it would be a great idea to chat with him. Thanks for being here, Nathan.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me on.
So, how on earth did you get involved in this line of work?
That's a great question. So actually, when I was an undergrad in college, I started working at a brewery, Terrapin Brewing Company in Athens, Georgia. And through that, became interested in some of the strange nuances that dictated how and when beer could be sold. At the time, Georgia had regulations that said you couldn't actually sell beer directly to consumers if you were a brewery. You could sell a tour to people, but at that tour, you were allowed to give up to 32 ounces of quote-unquote free samples. I thought this was strange, so I looked more into it, figured out that this was one of the many strange laws that regulated alcohol distribution and sales, and decided to make that the subject of my PhD.
For the sake of our audience, myself included, can you explain what makes a beer a craft beer?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. There's 2 dimensions to what makes a beer a craft beer. One is size and the other is independence. So to be a craft brewery, you need to produce less than 6 million barrels of beer or less. This is put out by the Brewers Association and is a self-determined definition that breweries have collectively agreed this is what makes beer craft beer. So that is the size component. The independence component is that a brewery is less than 25% owned by somebody else. So if you are independent and you will produce less than 6 million barrels of beer or less, then you are considered a craft beer. Now, that is separate than a microbrewery. A microbrewery produces less than 15,000 barrels of beer a year.
Can you explain then what an economist who researches this particular topic does?
Sure. As much as I would like to say that I research beer, I actually look at the economics behind beer supply chains as well as beer distribution and marketing. So I study how microbreweries operate within policy environments and how those policy environments change state to state. And they vary a whole lot. So again, I look at how breweries market their products, how effective those marketing policies are, and whether or not those marketing strategies can be improved. That was a big part of my work at Colorado State, as well as some of my recent work here at Florida. And additionally, I look at how breweries add value to agricultural inputs and whether there's potential in that industry to support local agriculture, such as hop production in Florida.
So what are some of the main challenges that craft breweries may be facing in this current economic climate?
Yeah, so craft brewing is becoming an increasingly competitive industry as the overall numbers of breweries plateau after a decade of growth. So the past 10 years has been characterized by unprecedented rise in the number of craft breweries across the nation. And we knew that that could not go on indefinitely. And it looks like we are at the point where we might be reaching some type of carrying capacity. Bart Watson, the chief economist of the Brewers Association, says that going forward, the industry is likely to be characterized by slow to no growth and that breweries need to expect this as the new normal. As I said, this is not bad. Reaching this point was inevitable. It's just a sign that the industry is maturing. As far as other challenges, rising cost and labor shortages, which are impacting all industries, that's impacting the brewing sector. Other challenges would be potential trade disputes. There was an aluminum tariff not too long ago. You think about what craft beer is packaged in most often, that's aluminum cans. So a sharp increase in the price of aluminum impacts craft breweries. Because it's a competitive environment, they're not able to easily pass those costs on to the consumer. So craft breweries often must eat the cost of the rise in the price of the inputs that they use. But breweries will increasingly need to innovate and distinguish themselves on shelves from other beer, as well as thinking of ways to reach new consumer segments through, this can be different styles of beer, such as American lagers, which appeal to a different demographic than, say, your IPAs, or by having inclusive marketing to bring in a more diverse group of consumers beyond the male millennial consumer that has so far supported the industry.
And so you mentioned your interest first came out of this interesting policy that they had in Georgia. Are there any particular policies or regulation that have significantly influenced this recent growth of microbreweries and craft breweries?
Sure. So as I mentioned, policies vary a whole lot state by state, and there's a slew of policies that breweries themselves say impact their growth. These include self-distribution laws, which say whether or not a brewery can sell directly to the package store or the liquor store in town. So, for example, Florida does not allow self-distribution. So for First Magnitude here in Gainesville to sell to a liquor store here downtown or just a mile down the road, they first have to sell to a distributor. That distributor has to get the beer from the brewery, bring it to their warehouse, and then take it from their warehouse to the bar or the liquor store. So by mandate, there has to be a middleman between the brewery and the retailer. That is known as the three-tier system. And the laws regulating whether breweries have to go through that distributor vary state by state. Another policy that breweries cite as being important in regulating their growth is the regulation of distribution territories. So Colorado has a policy where you have to have exclusive distribution territories. If you're a brewery that self-distributes in Colorado, your distribution territory cannot overlap with that of your distributor. So if you want to sell to the Kroger and the liquor store and the bar in town, your distributor has to have a distribution outside of town. They cannot also distribute to any retailer within your distribution territory. And that creates all kinds of logistical hurdles that breweries have to figure out. Franchise laws is another example. Franchise laws just dictate the terms under which a brewery can terminate a contract with the distributor. A lot of times, franchise laws say the breweries have to buy out their value from a distributor in order to terminate the contract, which makes terminating contracts prohibitively expensive. So the common joke amongst breweries is that it's easier to get a divorce than to break up with your distributor. Finally, there's retail restrictions on alcohol availability, which is what I studied when I looked at the availability of beer and other alcohol types in grocery and convenience stores and how that varies state by state.
You had an article that came out relatively recently. The name of that article was Beer Sales in Grocery and Convenience Stores, a Glass Half Full for Craft Brewers, which, by the way, I want to compliment you on that title. More and more people should spend time crafting cool titles like that. Can you tell me some of the interesting findings that you had in that research?
Absolutely. In full disclosure, I can't recall if it was myself that came up with the glass half full or one of my co-authors, but either way, it's probably one of the best puns that I've managed to get into an article title. But as the title suggests, that policy was a mixed bag for craft breweries in terms of beer entering grocery stores. So large breweries with brand recognition do extremely well in the grocery and convenience channel because it offers the convenience of one-stop shopping for consumers, and it puts their beer in another channel in front of them and just increases their reach, increases their opportunities to get in front of consumers, and perhaps consumers they wouldn't be able to get in front of otherwise if they were only in the liquor store channel. However, smaller and emerging breweries have an uphill climb to get on grocery store shelves. Grocery stores have much more limited shelf space, and they expect you to distribute to a minimum number of stores and to always have that product ready to go on their shelves. And if you're a small brewery with a limited production capacity and you want to experiment making different styles, that can be a pretty tough demand for you to meet. The other challenge that policy made is it gave consumers less incentive to go to the liquor store. So you see lower foot traffic in liquor stores as a result of this policy. So you have traditional channels small breweries are able to access, but they don't have access to these large grocery stores.
And so you mentioned that you were looking at how this liquor sale law affected the craft breweries there in Colorado. What are some of the data types that you can use to understand how a policy is affecting micro or craft breweries and their ability to sell their products?
Absolutely. So there's all kinds of different data available, especially related to alcohol, because it is one of the most highly regulated substances. So states and the federal government collect all kinds of data on alcohol sales through taxes. So beer, each state taxes beer through excise taxes and collects records on how much beer is produced by who in a given month, and that they aggregate that data for anonymity purposes, but you can get that data from the state. You can also get excise tax data from the federal government, and you can use more traditional economic data sources such as consumer panel data, sales data through Nielsen, and other private sources as well. The problem with those sources is that they don't have great coverage of liquor stores because liquor stores are small, atomized businesses. There's not a lot of coverage for those types of businesses when it comes to scanner data.
Has the data that you've been able to acquire yielded any information about if there are any kind of demographic or geographic factors that might make an area more likely to be a hotspot for microbreweries?
That's a really good question. So not necessarily data that I've collected, but other research has shown that breweries tend to locate in more urban areas with higher population density. More people means more foot traffic. And when you're a brewery that's just starting out, you're a small brew pub, having people in your tap room is really what's going to drive your growth until you get to a size where you can transition to a larger, more distribution-focused model if that's your goal as a business. Within urban areas, breweries often tend to locate more in industrial areas with cheaper real estate and suitable infrastructure for their needs. Breweries are considered light manufacturing for zoning purposes and require a certain amount of vertical height and minimum drainage capacity due to their brew houses and tanks. And because of this, they often move into places like former warehouses, factories, or even auto shops. In Gainesville, for example, First Magnitude is located in a former warehouse, while Cypress and Grove is located in an old ice plant. Breweries also tend to locate close to other breweries. In economics, we call this economies of agglomeration, which is just a fancy way of saying that breweries benefit from being in close proximity to other breweries. Think of places like Asheville, North Carolina, where you have a large number of breweries located in a relatively small geographic area. This is because they can share labor, they can share equipment, and they can share knowledge with one another. Finally, breweries also tend to be drawn towards millennial consumers. Thinking about who tends to consume the most beer and spend the most money on beer, this tends to be millennials. So breweries tend to locate where there's a higher concentration of millennials.
You know, it's interesting that you point out that they sort of repurpose these older buildings to put breweries in, because I think even a couple of them use that aesthetic of this. We used to be an old bank, for example, to draw customers in.
Absolutely. The first brewery I worked at was located in a former jeans factory. So this is a common theme throughout. And you think of where hotspots have risen. I mentioned Asheville, but the River North District or the Rhino District of Denver is famous at this point for its brewing scene. That's where Great Divide is located. You can find many, many breweries in the River North District of Denver. And this area actually used to be a fairly rundown part of town, and the rise of the craft beer scene has completely transformed that neighborhood.
So what are some of the larger impacts that a craft beer brewery might have on, say, the local economy?
That's a great question. Breweries impact their local communities in a number of ways. So first, breweries, as I mentioned, are considered light manufacturing, and as such, they provide a variety of jobs from brewmasters and packaging. But they're also in the customer service business, so they provide service industry jobs as well, management jobs, marketing teams, depending on the size of the brewery. So they provide a variety of jobs to the local area. Second, breweries work with other local businesses, including alcohol distributors, banks, tax professionals, and that has positive effects as that money continues to circulate in the local economy. Third, breweries are being more and more recognized for the role they serve in providing neighborhood and community gathering places. They're sometimes referred to as a third place or an anchor business, and because they serve as destinations that people go to, they drive foot traffic that can benefit other local businesses, and they create affordable meeting spaces for people to hang out, relax, work, places that bring communities together. In contrast to bars, breweries often have family-friendly environments with outdoor spaces that people, again, can engage in leisure or they can bring their pets to. And this is borne out in studies that show that breweries tend to increase the value of surrounding commercial real estate and that they can contribute to the economic revitalization of urban neighborhoods.
So are there any other projects you have going on or that are coming up that you're excited about?
Absolutely. So I'm currently working with some wonderful collaborators in the Food and Resource Economics Department on consumer willingness to pay for things that I just spoke about. So local ingredients. So what would their willingness to pay be for Florida hops, beer made with Florida hops, as well as beer that bears the label of corporate social responsibility. So there's various labels, one of them being a certified B Corporation. I'm also working with a colleague in horticulture, Dr. Agahara, on the economic viability of hop production in Florida and looking at the brewer's willingness to pay for these inputs and whether or not that would support a viable hop industry here in the Sunshine State.
And with that, we've just about wrapped up our episode for today. Nathan, thanks for joining us. And to our listeners at home, just remember, beer isn't just a drink, it's a business, a community, and sometimes the best way to explain ag economics.
Cheers to that. And if you are interested in learning more about Nathan's work, we'll be sure to put a link to his faculty directory page in this episode's description.
If you've made it this far, you've finished the entire episode, and we thank you for that. Tune in next time for more food for thought. Thanks again for joining us on this episode of F.R.E. Lunch. We hope you'll come back again for seconds.